I have learned in a long life that people do not always betray you with knives or raised voices. Sometimes they do it with cheerful certainty, the way they might move a chair from one corner of a room to another. A small decision, made as if it is already agreed. The first time I understood what my family now believed about me, it was over breakfast. My granddaughter had stayed the night. She was 14 then, all limbs and headphones, and she sat at my table scrolling through her phone. The kettle clicked off. I poured tea into my cup and watched the steam lift. My hands are steadier than most people assume. My son, Andrew, came in from the back porch with his shoes still on. He did not look at me straight away. He looked at the fridge, then at his daughter. "Your mum's still asleep?" he asked her. She shrugged without taking her eyes off the screen. "She went to bed late." Andrew nodded, as if this explained something important. Then his wife, Melissa, followed him in. She had that brisk morning energy some people carry like a badge. The phone in her hand was already lit. She slid it into her pocket and began wiping a perfectly clean bench with a cloth, not because it needed wiping, but because movement made her feel in charge. "What did the doctor say?" she asked Andrew, though she was standing close enough to me to see the spots on my hands. "Same as last time," he said. "Keep an eye on his blood pressure. Take it easy. Watch the falls." Melissa made a sympathetic sound that was meant for the room, not for me. I took my tea to the table and sat down. The chair gave its familiar creak. I have lived in this house for most of my adult life. The floorboards know my footsteps. Every corner holds a habit. Melissa opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Not one of mine. One I had not seen before. It was thick, with labeled tabs. She set it on the table beside Andrew as if it belonged there. "We should talk about the plan," she said. Andrew glanced at me, then away again. His eyes flicked up in that quick way people look at furniture they are about to move. "We can talk later," he said. "No," Melissa said, and her voice was still pleasant, which is what made it worse. "We should talk while everyone's here. We don't need secrets." She turned to me then, smiling as though she were including me in something. "Dad," she said, and she always called me that, even though she had never meant it. "We've been thinking. It's time we got ahead of things." "Got ahead of what?" I asked. My voice came out soft, not weak. There is a difference. I have been quiet most of my life, but I have never been confused. Melissa's smile widened a fraction. "The future, just the practical side, so you don't have to worry." Andrew sat down opposite me, not beside me. He placed his forearms on the table like a man preparing to negotiate, but his shoulders were loose as if he believed the outcome was settled. "We've been looking at options," he said. "A place closer to us. Somewhere with support. Meals? Nurses if you need them." I looked down at my cup and watched the tea surface tremble once, then settle. "And this house?" I asked. Andrew's mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly. Melissa answered before he could. "This house is a lot for one person," she said. "Maintenance, rates, insurance, and the stairs, Dad. We worry every time you go up and down." The stairs. 14 steps. A handrail I installed myself. "We could sell," Andrew said, finally meeting my eyes. He made it sound like a favor. "Use the money to make things easier." Melissa tapped the folder with her fingertip. "I've already contacted a few agents to get a sense of the market. Just preliminary. No one's coming through yet." She said yet, like it was a timetable. I sat back in my chair and folded my hands. I let the pause hang long enough that I could hear the fridge hum, my granddaughter's quiet tapping, the distant hiss of a sprinkler outside. "What makes you think this is your decision to make?" I asked. Andrew blinked, and in that blink I saw it plainly. Not anger, not fear, but surprise. As if a lamp had turned on in a room he thought was empty. Melissa's smile did not move. but her eyes hardened slightly. "It's not about decisions," she said. "It's about reality. We can't pretend things stay the same forever." They had already decided what reality was, and in their version of it, I was already gone. After that morning, something shifted that I could not unsee. It was not that they began doing new things. It was that they stopped pretending not to. Conversations happened around me instead of with me. I would be in the room, reading the paper or watching the birds outside the window, and they would speak as though I were already halfway elsewhere. Not deaf, exactly, just irrelevant. Melissa was the first to relax into it. She stopped lowering her voice when she took calls. She paced the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear, discussing timelines and figures in that careful, competent tone she used when she wanted to sound informed. "Yes, he's still there," she said once, standing by the laundry door. "But realistically, we're looking at a few months. He's slowing down." I was sitting at the kitchen table, no more than 3 meters away, buttering toast. Andrew followed her lead, though with more hesitation. He still checked my face sometimes, as if expecting resistance to materialize. When it did not, his shoulders loosened. Men like my son do not enjoy conflict. They prefer momentum. One afternoon, he brought home a set of brochures and left them on the coffee table. "Just information," he said when he noticed me looking at them. "You don't have to read them." I picked one up anyway. Heavy paper, soft colors, smiling older couples walking along paths lined with trees that had never dropped leaves. He watched me closely, waiting for a reaction. "They look comfortable," I said, and set it back down. Relief crossed his face before he could stop it. That was when they became careless. They discussed my finances openly, with only the vaguest understanding of them. Andrew assumed my accounts were simple because he had never been invited into their complexity. Melissa assumed they were small because she had never seen their structure. "She's still got that old savings account," Melissa said one evening, scrolling on her tablet. "Barely any interest. It's just sitting there." Andrew frowned. "I thought Dad moved most of it years ago." "No," she said confidently. "I checked with the bank. There's not much activity." She had checked one bank. They spoke about powers of attorney as though they were inevitable, not granted. They spoke about selling timelines as though the house were already half-packed. They even spoke about my things. "We should start sorting the shed," Andrew said once. "There's a lot of junk in there." Not junk, tools, records, things with purpose. I said nothing. Silence is often mistaken for agreement, especially by people who are eager for it. What they did not understand was that I was not withdrawing. I was paying attention. I noticed which documents Melissa copied and which she ignored. I noticed the names she mispronounced when she read them aloud. I noticed the casual way Andrew mentioned a cousin I had not spoken to in years, as if proximity equaled loyalty. I noticed how quickly they stopped checking whether I minded. That was the most telling part. When people believe you have no leverage, they stop performing for you. They stop polishing their intentions. They stop worrying about how things look. They assume resistance is no longer a factor. By the time they stopped asking me anything at all, the assumption was complete, and they had grown very comfortable inside it. By then, my days had become predictably quiet, which suited me. I woke early, as I always had. I made my tea the same way. I sat by the window in the late morning and watched the street wake up. The neighbors came and went. Deliveries arrived. Routines unfolded with a comforting indifference to whatever my family believed was happening inside this house. They mistook this consistency for decline. Andrew began taking calls in the driveway instead of the porch, as if distance granted him privacy. Melissa no longer bothered. She sat at the dining table with her laptop open, papers spread out, working through matters that were, strictly speaking, none of hers. "Once it's listed, things will move quickly," she said one afternoon. Not to me, but not avoiding me either. "We'll just need his signature." His signature. As if it were a formality, like checking a box. I turned a page in my book. She glanced up. You're all right with that, aren't you? It was not a question that invited thought. It was a question designed to close a loop. I'm listening, I said. She took that as confirmation. The comfort phase, I realized, was not about cruelty. It was about relief. They felt unburdened by opposition. They felt free to speak plainly, to plan efficiently, to move forward without friction. That freedom made them sloppy. Melissa assumed my memory was patchy. She repeated herself unnecessarily, re-explaining things I had already heard, sometimes contradicting her own earlier statements. Dates shifted, figures changed, explanations were adjusted mid-sentence, as though accuracy no longer mattered. Andrew assumed my relationships were thin. He spoke about friends as if they were casual acquaintances. He forgot which names I had known for decades and which ones had come and gone. He's probably lost touch, he said once, referring to a man I still spoke to every fortnight. I let him believe it. They assumed I no longer understood systems, that the world had moved on without me, that forms, structures, and safeguards were the domain of younger minds. What they did not see was that I had spent my life inside those systems, quietly, methodically. I had learned early that influence rarely announces itself. It accumulates in records, in relationships maintained without display, in arrangements that do not need revisiting because they were built correctly the first time. I listened as Melissa described her version of my affairs to someone on the phone, confident and incomplete. Yes, everything's very straightforward, she said. There's really nothing complicated left. Nothing left. That was when I understood that the assumption was no longer tentative. It had settled fully. They were not testing it anymore. They were building on it. And when people build on a false foundation, they do not check the ground beneath them. They assume it will hold. The moment I stopped being included was the moment everything clarified. They did not announce it. Exclusion rarely arrives with ceremony. It simply appears as absence. Meetings held elsewhere. Calls taken behind closed doors. Decisions presented as updates rather than questions. Melissa stopped leaving papers on the table. She kept them in her bag now, zipped shut, as though confidentiality mattered again. Just not to me. Andrew began phrasing things carefully, not out of respect, but efficiency. We've handled that, he would say. It's sorted. There's no need for you to worry about it. Worry. As if that had ever been my problem. I let the rhythm continue. I answered when spoken to. I nodded when appropriate. I allowed them to believe that the narrowing of my world had reached its natural conclusion. What I was actually doing was observing the edges. I noticed which outside names entered their conversations and which never did. I noticed which institutions they referenced confidently and which they avoided entirely. I noticed how often Melissa said should when she meant assume, and how Andrew deferred to her certainty even when it contradicted his own memory. One evening, while clearing the table, Melissa mentioned a solicitor. Just someone we spoke to, she said lightly. Standard stuff. She did not name him. That omission mattered. People name things when they are real. They leave them vague when they are imagined. I began making quiet checks of my own. Not hurried, not defensive, simply confirming what I already knew. Files where they had always been. Instructions unchanged. Contacts responsive. Nothing missing. Nothing altered. The systems I had put in place years earlier did not require maintenance because they had been designed for neglect. They were meant to function without my supervision, without my explanation, without my presence. Authority, when done properly, survives absence. I listened to Melissa describe me to someone else one afternoon, her voice drifting down the hallway. He's comfortable, she said. He doesn't really question things anymore. I smiled to myself. Comfort is not the same as surrender. Silence is not the same as confusion. By the time they stopped monitoring my reactions altogether, they had already crossed the point where caution might have saved them. They had mistaken stillness for emptiness. and they had built their confidence on that mistake. The first sign that their certainty had reached its limit did not come from within the family. It came from a letter. It arrived in an envelope that did not match the others. Heavier paper, no logo, handwritten address. It was placed carefully on the hall table, where important things were left without discussion. Melissa picked it up first. "Is this yours?" she asked, holding it between two fingers. "Yes," I said. She hesitated, then handed it to me. There was a flicker in her expression. Not fear, exactly, but recalculation. I opened it slowly and read it at the table. I did not rush. There was no reason to. 2 days later, Andrew was home early, earlier than usual. He sat down opposite me with a posture I had not seen in some time. Straighter, more alert. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk." Melissa hovered in the doorway, listening. I waited. He cleared his throat. "We've been advised to pause things, just temporarily." "By whom?" I asked. He named someone then. Carefully, precisely. The name was correct. Melissa stepped forward. "We didn't realize," she said. "Some of these arrangements are more structured than we thought." Structured. That was one word for it. Over the next week, the tone changed. Not dramatically. No apologies, no admissions, just a gradual tightening of speech, fewer assumptions, more checking. Conversations became guarded again, as though the room had filled with someone they could no longer see clearly. They learned quietly that the house could not be sold without approvals they did not hold. That decisions they believed were procedural were, in fact, conditional. That authority did not flow through proximity or confidence, but through lines they had never noticed because they did not know where to look. No confrontation followed. There was no scene where I explained myself. I did not need to. Andrew became subdued. He asked questions again. Real ones. Melissa became distant, her efficiency dulled by uncertainty. They had misread the situation, that was all. Not maliciously, not cruelly. They had simply assumed that what they could see was all there was. In the end, nothing dramatic happened. No one was punished. No one was exposed. Plans dissolved. Timelines vanished. The house remained. What changed was the distance. They stopped managing me. I stopped correcting them. Control was replaced with space. Confidence with restraint. And I returned to my mornings by the window, my tea, my routines. Unchanged. Power, I have found, does not need to announce itself. It only needs to be there when required.